It may surprise you to hear that 2/3 of people accessing emergency relief for housing are under extreme housing stress. Now, in countries like, take for example, Australia, many adults are reporting more than half of their disposable income goes to just keeping a roof over their heads, leaving them pretty much little or no hope to really save for a deposit to own their own home. Plus, according to Demographica, Australia is the only country in the world where 77% of our population is living in housing that is classified as severely unaffordable. And that is defined by Demographica as being housing that is of value 6 or more times your annual income. So this isn't just, obviously something that's affecting Australia. Let's take a look at what's happened since the financial crisis back in 2008. Many people in the United States of America had been forced to rent at that period. It was reported that $8 million in mortgages were foreclosed on, and $7 trillion in home equity was literally erased overnight. What this means in practice is that the home ownership rate in America hasn't really increased much at all in the 31 years since 1990. And it took an incredibly long time for the market in the U.S. to rebound and recover from 2008, from that financial crisis. And what we are now seeing with COVID-19 is even more additional pressure on home ownership, as both homeowners and renters were really hit hard by the lockdowns and restrictions imposed to prevent the spread of the pandemic, which is why I'm really excited to welcome today's guest to the podcast. Daisy Ashworth, she's based over in Perth, Western Australia. She started off in local government in the United Kingdom, so you'll hear her beautiful accent. And she was specializing in welfare and housing law at Great Yarmouth Borough Council. She provided legal advice and benefit appeals, and she was involved in the creating of a legal advice website called Frigo. For the past 9 years, Daisy's been committed to ending homelessness in Western Australia, working for a not-for-profit agency in the area of housing, older adults, family services, and mental health. So she is a wealth of experience in this area. In 2015, Daisy started developing the social enterprise Mortgage Mates as well, which is a revolutionary website that matches 2 or more users to own a home together, with the aim of increasing affordable housing in the home ownership space. Daisy has been a finalist in the Pitch at Palace Awards, and she's also participated in the SBE E3 cohort for female founders in the startup space. So welcome to the show, Daisy. I'm really excited to speak with you today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is an area that I'm extremely passionate about, so hopefully I can share some passion with your listeners today.
Yeah, look, I think passionate and also knowledgeable. Most people are of the opinion, right, that it's getting harder and harder for people to get on the property ladder. I think that will be a comment that probably resonates with a lot of people. Are you aware of any statistics around the length of time it's actually taking for someone to save up a deposit right now?
Absolutely. So we know that currently for some of the first home buyers out there, it can take over 10 years to save for a house deposit. And of course, that's taking into account that individual is able to save consistently during that time frame, is still able to pay rent, which is increasing month on month, not even year on year anymore, and doesn't have any significant life challenges that may cause them to delay that savings amount. And of course, it's taking into account that the house that they're saving for doesn't increase in value during that time either. So cautiously, we say 10 years, but it could be significantly longer for some people in some of the major cities in Australia.
Does that time frame change when you're looking at sort of singles versus couples? Are there any differentiations there?
Absolutely. So actually, for first-time home buyers, 65% of buyers are couples. And the reason for that is that once you have 2 people or more purchasing a home together, it actually becomes much more affordable. So if you're an individual who is looking to buy a home independently, then the chances are the length of time that you will need to save for a deposit is going to be significantly longer than that time frame as well.
Yeah, and we all know that there have been a lot of unexpected occurrences and challenges, particularly over the last 12 months, that would have directly impacted this, correct?
Absolutely. So it's the unforeseen circumstances that really impact the ability to save for a deposit. And something like a pandemic is obviously a significant global issue, which we've seen impact individuals in the both first home buyer market, but also the returning home buyer market, meaning that they're having to make significant life choices around their housing need. We know that many young people actually returned to living with their parents during the global pandemic because the ability to maintain employment, especially in some of those more gig economy sectors or in the hospitality industry, was impacted as well. And so they've actually had to readdress how they might continue to live in their home ownership space in the future. So for many, the 10-year time frame has probably been blown out completely. They're really having to reconsider whether home ownership is even something which they will be able to achieve in the next 10, 20 or 30 years.
Yeah, fair enough. Do you have a feel for what the average age of a first homeowner is right now?
So we know that statistics say that it's around 36 years of age would be the time that somebody enters the property market as a first home buyer. And that obviously shifts slightly depending on whether you are part of a relationship or whether you're buying with another person. But we know that it's edging towards the age of 40. And actually, since 2011, there's been a 50% reduction in home ownership for 18 to 29-year-olds and a 20% reduction for 30 to 39-year-olds. So we're seeing significant shifts in the ability to enter the property market. And that's before you throw a pandemic into the mix, which again will probably have long-term implications for individuals and their housing choices.
Wow. Are there specific groups of people that you think who are sort of at more of a disadvantage when it comes to getting on the property ladder?
Absolutely. Owning your own home is obviously an independent factor. And so things that come into play would be the employment space that you're in, the ability to have employment or maintain employment. And it can happen to anyone, but probably the cohorts that most significantly are impacted is the younger Australians, so somebody looking to enter the property market, those that are looking to re-enter the property market, so older adults, especially women over the age of 55, who perhaps are looking to purchase a property due to a relationship breakdown or having a partner pass away. They struggle significantly with being able to save the deposit needed to enter the property market again. Lone parents, so again, because they're on a low income or a single income, they have additional costs to consider, such as childcare and the cost of raising a child in Australia. All of those external factors can potentially impact somebody's ability to own a home.
Fair enough. I think I saw some statistics somewhere. Perhaps you might be able to enlighten me or refresh my memory on what they were, that sort of over 55 plus women were the largest group of going towards homelessness right now in Australia. Is that correct?
So they're the fastest demographic increasing in entering homelessness in Australia. So we know that older adults, specifically women, are more challenged because some of those life experiences impact them financially. So if they do separate with a partner, or if a partner has passed away, perhaps they come from a generation where they were more likely to stay at home and care for their children. All of these factors, their superannuation amounts, impact their ability to look at long-term stable housing options.
And I'm not aware of any actual legislation or government grants or policies that specifically address this, are you?
No, not specifically for that particular cohort. And it's not to say that there aren't options out there for them, but it's, again, if you or I are not aware of them, making sure that people who are entering that space for the first time, perhaps have never been unstably housed before, have the ability to learn, research and action some of those potential opportunities. Even something like Mortgage Mates, which is predominantly seen as probably a younger Australians opportunity, could absolutely work for the older adult space, but it's being able to link in with those individuals, give them the education and guidance around how co-ownership might work for them, and support them to make some different choices than perhaps they thought they would need to do in their later years.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, what other constructive or viable options really exist currently for those people who can't afford to buy a property on their own, whether they be young or single or female at 55 plus.
So we see housing in Australia as a continuum of choices and options, whether it be crisis accommodation, social housing, private rental market, and then, of course, home ownership. If you remove home ownership from somebody's opportunity or choice for housing, then what's predominantly left is the opportunity to seek social housing or private rental accommodation. For social housing, you have to obviously meet the requirements for that particular program. In Western Australia, we know that the waitlist times are being impacted by the housing crisis here as well. And so you may be looking at a 10-year wait to be able to access social housing or local government housing. So that predominantly leaves you in the private rental market. And with everybody that's entering the private rental market, you are impacted by the market itself. So how affordable property is, how easily accessible property is, and how able you are to maintain a particular property is all impacted by the housing affordability crisis. And so we know for individuals that are located in private rentals, very often they have very unsecure tenure. It's down to the landlord or the real estate agent as to how long you're able to live in a particular property. The cost of that accommodation can also vary. So when leases are renewed, or if you are having to seek a new private rental option, then you're basically having to address whatever the housing market requires of you. So you may have been in a property paying $300 a week, and then the next time you go to find a property, the same kind of accommodation might be $400 a week. And so you're really, I guess, restricted to some of those opportunities that you can choose. There are some innovation and innovative products that are coming into the market that are looking to address some of those challenges. You do have options like co-living as an example, which is, I guess, the same as mortgage mates, but for the private rental sector. So you would look at sharing a house with somebody with similar needs and aspirations as you in a private market. But you are still ultimately adhering to a landlord or a property manager's needs. So the cost that you would pay and how long you would live there would still be determined by the market rather than yourself.
Yeah, fair enough. And let's be clear that missing out on owning a property does have an impact on your financial aspirations, your financial potential, and ultimately, the amount of money that you're going to have to retire on when you hit that retirement age.
Absolutely. So recent research has definitely shown us that, especially for younger Australians, they're actually suffering increased anxiety about the future because of this lack of stable and affordable housing. We know that if you don't own a home by the time you retire, that you're likely to be severely impoverished. And that, again, is because your ability to sustain yourself in a property is much more vulnerable, and that it has intergenerational impact. So if a parent is not owning their own home, then that can potentially impact their children as well. So it's not just the individual that will potentially be impacted financially. It can have a long-term knock-on effect for multi-generations. So it's a really significant problem for people. And yet, despite this,
and that's a really big thing. And I want to circle back because I want to make sure that we don't skip over that too quickly. Often when we hear people speaking about this property issue, right, it becomes so focused on the individual. But in fact, there are also very legitimate aspects around how the inability to get on the ladder can have intergenerational impacts. Can you elaborate on that? Because I know that you have a wealth of information around how you are actually seeing this play out in real time in the market with families over multiple generations.
Absolutely. So we know that home ownership is an aspiration for many Australians, and that actually people see the ability to own their own home as a significant milestone in their lifetime. And so the inability to do that has quite significant mental health impacts as well for individuals. And the reason that it has such a significant financial impact for people is because the resulting choices that individuals are left with to maintain some form of accommodation or a suitable housing is often the private rental market. And so if families are paying 50, 60, 70% of their income towards their rent, then the ability to maintain other aspects of their life becomes significantly impacted as well. If you have minimal available income to pay towards education, healthcare, opportunities, then it begins to impact and create this cycle of poverty, which we're seeing for families that are predominantly now based in the rental market. As we've seen over very recent times due to the coronavirus, if you look at Perth, for example, as a city in Australia, we are now in a market where there are almost 0% available rentals for people to locate, which means that families that perhaps were able to maintain a tenancy up until 6 to 12 months ago are actually facing the real prospect of becoming homeless. So if a child is born into poverty and born into homelessness, then the likelihood of them being able to substantially achieve financial wealth and stability, which isn't purely attached to housing but is significantly impacted by it, is much harder for them. And it certainly doesn't mean that it's not possible, and it certainly doesn't mean that we should be disregarding the ability to own a home if you're born into challenging circumstances, but it does mean that you're going to probably face additional challenges that others may not have had to go through.
Can you tell the listeners a little bit about your personal background? Because you've been doing what you've been doing in this industry for quite a long time, both abroad and also here in Australia. And then how that relates to, the specific things that you're working on to really make a difference and to offer options and alternatives to these problems?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you touched on at the beginning of this podcast, I began working in the United Kingdom in the welfare and housing space for a local authority. And it was there that I really found a passion for helping individuals maintain the best level of lifestyle that they can do on the income that they have. So as you touched upon, working in the appeal space for benefits in the United Kingdom, and also working with individuals that were in social and affordable housing in the UK as well. Since arriving in Australia 9 years ago, I have been working in the housing and homelessness sector, really focusing on finding ways and innovative solutions to ending homelessness. I guess that's where my passion for looking at solutions to how do we make housing more affordable really started to flourish. And over a period of time, it's how I developed Mortgage Mates. And when we talk about housing affordability, I think we do sometimes get lost in the statistics of real estate and property and affordability from a very practical sense. And for us at Mortgage Mates, we really want to roll it back to the impact that it has on the individuals, and that real people are impacted by every increase that a property market goes through, every year that deposits are increased for somebody to have to save towards. That has a real life impact for somebody who would otherwise have been able to own their own home. So Mortgage Mates effectively takes two people, we call them mates, but users of the website, matches them based on housing preferences like location, deposit, type of property that you might want to live in, and we match you together so that you can co-own a home. And we touched on the discussion point of co-living a little while ago, and it's basically taking co-living but to a more permanent structure. So it's enabling you to develop your own equity. It's allowing you to enter the property market sometimes 50, 60 or 70% quicker than if you were looking to buy a home on your own. And it means that you can actually live in an area that you want to be in rather than an area that you can afford to buy in. So we know that for Australians, up to 1 in 4 of us will experience loneliness in our lifetime. And so for us, we're not just looking at providing somebody with a physical property. We're actually looking at providing people with a connection to community, an ability to flourish financially, and to ultimately go on to have the housing choices that perhaps they wouldn't have had if Mortgage Mates wasn't in the space.
Fair enough. Are most of the people that are being matched together, are they intending to live in the property together, or is it are there also some people who are using it to enter the market and then to rent that property and earn income from it. What do you see?
We offer both options on Mortgage Mates. It is ultimately down to our mates to make the decision around which version of Mortgage Mates they use. But we created the platform to allow people to co-live together, because what we want the platform to do is positively impact the entire housing continuum. So what we do know is, and we touched on this a little bit earlier as well, is that currently we have, I guess, cohorts in the private rental market who should be in home ownership but aren't, because the cost of owning your own home is too high. And what that actually does is then impacts all of the other people that are in the private rental market who perhaps don't have the ability to own a home at this point, to be very competitive. You know, we're creating a competitive private rental market because home ownership isn't really available for many cohorts. So what we want to do with Mortgage Mates is make home ownership more affordable for those that are priced just outside of that opportunity, so that we can actually positively impact the entire continuum and enable those that perhaps are in the rental market for a little bit longer to have a more affordable, stable market to work with. We know that 92% of renters actually aspire to own, and yet less than 50% of them feel they'll ever be able to achieve that. And Mortgage Mates is one way in which we can make it a slightly more affordable, achievable goal for them.
From the perspective of the lender, does the risk profile change because the two people who are about to buy this property together aren't related?
No, and actually one of, I guess, our talking points and education points for Mortgage Mates is that we're probably a safer option for a lender than perhaps the traditional partner buyers. So co-ownership is not a new phenomenon. We haven't created co-ownership. We've just changed the model. Most people, as we've talked about already, 65% of first home buyers are couples. That's actually a form of co-ownership. So all we've done is added a different dynamic, which is that you can buy with somebody you don't have a personal relationship with, as well as somebody that you do. But probably the biggest part for us that sets us apart from partners that are buying together is that we talk about having a co-ownership agreement as part of our ownership process. So the co-ownership agreement actually predetermines in a contractual agreement what you intend to do with that property. So how long you intend to live together, whether you intend to have an exit strategy, whether you intend to have partners that can move in with you, and what would be the impact to the mortgage if that choice was made, and what to do if you were to be financially impacted. So insurances that you might want to have in place, like employment insurances or the relevant housing and building insurances that you need to safely own. All of that gets encompassed into this contract and means that you're very clear as co-owners from the very beginning exactly how your home ownership journey is going to play out. What we find with partners or friends and family members that buy together is that they don't do a co-ownership agreement. So they actually don't consider what might happen if one of them becomes unemployed or if they were to separate and need to sell the property. And so the risk at that point becomes significantly higher, because whilst we know when you buy a house with someone that you love, you go into it thinking that everything will be wonderful and that the outcomes will be fantastic. Unfortunately, if a breakup occurs, some of those thoughts and aspirations become a little bit trickier to play out in real life. And so actually for a lender at that point, it's probably far riskier because they don't know what the outcome might be. Whereas for our mates, it's clear from day one.
I think, well, it's interesting because a number of episodes ago, I did an interview with someone and she brought up the statistic that I think it was 77 or 80% of people do not have income protection or any kind of insurances in place. And that would probably explain in many, many circumstances in cases where when there is a death or a breakup of the relationship, they're unable to keep the house because there's no way to sustain the mortgage payment.
Absolutely. And it's not been discussed previously. So there's been no pre-agreement around what might happen or what the opportunities or choices might be to maintain that mortgage at that point. Whereas for our mates, we're really clear that those are the conversations you should be having right at the beginning of your relationship. And before you consider buying a property, the most important thing to have in place is the co-ownership agreement with all of those strategies in place should the worst things happen.
So that's another new product for you. You could start offering your co-ownership agreements as something that could be used by couples outside of your platform.
Because absolutely. And we provide information on our website around co-ownership and how to do it safely. And so if there are people that are considering buying with either a partner or a family member or a friend, you can absolutely use the resources that we have to also play out in your own experience as well.
Yeah, and make sure you get some legal advice around this stuff, because you should be having a will.
Yes.
You should also have, insurances in place. This is probably for most people the biggest investment of their life, and oftentimes it's being entered into with no real planning and no real, advice being taken or given.
Absolutely. So we know that most Australians see having a mortgage as a good debt, i.e. the debt is purposeful. It's because they want to own the property that they're buying. And that's fantastic. And like we've talked about already, owning your own home has such a significant financial, emotional, mental and physical well-being impacts that it really is beneficial to do that. But then most of us don't follow up by doing that in a safe and secure way. So with Mortgage Mates, we are just the introductory service. We call ourselves the Bumble of home ownership, because very much like a dating site, we do that initial connection. We match you with the mate that we think has the closest aspirations as you in the housing space. But then what we actually do is refer you through to third parties that specialize in particular products that you might need to use, like having a lawyer that can support you in the home ownership process, having a real estate agent that fully understands how does co-ownership work, what do we need to do it safely, and of course the correct lenders and brokers that are using and seeing co-ownership as an opportunity to add additional products to the market.
Great. Well, look, thank you so much for really providing what I think is a powerful and viable alternative to home ownership for a lot of people out there, because not everyone necessarily has perhaps a sibling, a parent, or a romantic partner that they can enter into the market with. But to getting onto the property ladder is such a fundamental part of your financial portfolio overall, because as you said, the numbers of people who are entering retirement without a property under their belt, it is significantly impacting their potential to be homeless in their, what should be the golden years of their life. If people want to get in touch with you or they want to know a little bit more about what you do, what is the best way to do that? And I will also put the links in the show notes. So just let the listeners know, is it LinkedIn? Is it email? What's the best way?
Thank you for that opportunity and for giving me the platform to talk about housing affordability in Australia. I think hopefully I've provided an interesting and insightful space of what's happening at the moment for individuals in this cohort. The best way to contact me is probably via email, and that's daisy@mortgagemates.com.au. But I am also on LinkedIn as Daisy Ashworth Brown, as I got married recently. So happy for people to link into me there as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to hearing back from you in a few months as to how your software is going.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. We're currently moving from our MVP platform through to our fully functional, brand new state-of-the-art website, which will be launching in hopefully a couple of months. So I would encourage anyone that perhaps has seen our MVP product and would like to see what we've done to modify and improve our algorithm and our matching capabilities to come and take a look once we've launched the new product in a couple of months.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.